Amen.
Finances, pay the power bill, enjoy it. We had some folks come by the house the other night, and I had gone, I jogged pretty good bit, so I came back to the house, and I was sitting on the back porch, and he was like, I said, y'all, I do pay the power bill. More than willing to go inside and enjoy that air conditioning. I am paying for it, y'all like it. They said, oh, we can take the hint. No hint there. It's outright. I want to go inside. No, I don't think I'll that do, but I thought, man, it is nice to have a place to go and just host. So, anyhow, I feel like Pastor's hurrying through the way of his life. Just trying to get to hurry up and be done with the way. I don't want to hurry. No. But we are certainly in his life. We're in the I guess where the battle's hot for him. And even as I considered that, I thought about the fact that here's 100 years of this man's life, and I'm of course theorizing he's about 100 years old right now, just guessing, but he's in the neighborhood of 100 years old, something like that. He may be older than that. He's probably not any younger. That said, you can imagine how long he has waited for the kingdom of Judah to be back to be what it's supposed to be. And he has seen it decline to the point that it is with Dolly on the throne. And only he knows that God's promised seed, the seed of the house of David, rests inside his walls, not in the palace where it should be. And yet there's that time of waiting, planning, of praying, counseling with either just with Jehoida, his wife, or just maybe a close friend or two that he could trust to say, what's the right time to do this? And so the right time came. And when the right time came, here it was. Time to see all of this taken and put on the table, as it were. I hate to use a reference like that, but his cards on the table, as it were, to say, okay, this is what it is. We've got God's seed. We've got the seed of the house of David here. Are there faithful men in Israel who will stand to the task of bringing this child to the throne? Not because the child has any particular characteristics or qualities of king. That's not the point. The point is that God has said, this is what it's to be. And so, he makes a plan. And if you've been practicing the lines,
yeah.
You've been practicing on that.
Sure.
Treason.
Yeah.
Treason.
Every day.
Yeah. Well, she looks at me when she says that.
The irony of it, treason. And yet, that was the point at which she had essentially condemned herself with those words. And we read about that and discussed that last week. The work of Jehoiada was not merely that of a military coup. This was a wholesale restoration. It's not a power grab. What we observe now in verses 16 through 21, which we'll read in a moment, is simply the culmination of years of waiting and planning and praying. Furthermore, that period of waiting was simply the outflow of the way Jehoiada had lived his life. It was the pattern of his life. It was the direction of constantly pursuing the rightful, lawful, scriptural, as I should clarify there, the scriptural worship of the one true and living God, which was not always according to the stereotypical job description of a high priest. Certainly was not in the plan he had to conduct and execute in case of bringing Joash to the throne, but to have taken the child, to have housed him in his own house in the temple of the Lord for 6 years, to have to recruit all these people, to wait, to wonder, and to have essentially the balance of the kingdom in human terms in the palm of his hands. All of that, it did not catch him as a man unprepared. He had directed, he had his ways directed, he had his ways guarded and established such that it didn't take him by surprise. What do we do now? Certainly the particular steps, there was much thought, prayer, and planning, counsel, wisdom that had to be undertaken. But the same principles were still in effect. This is what the Lord has said. Now that continues in verses 16 through 21. But the proof of his character in all of this is not simply what he did in the bravery and the wisdom of his plan and the execution. Jehoiada's character is also observed in the way he conducted himself after the plan succeeded. I've titled this tonight, Jehoiada's success and what he did. What did he do with the success he achieved? And all of this stands in stark contrast with Athaliah. Athaliah had just a lust for power. She did make a power grab. I'm going to read to you what J.G. McConville writes about this. He says, the story of Athaliah is a testimony to the ephemeral and ultimately illusory character of brute power exercised in a self-serving way. By Athaliah's standard, there could be no treason, because for her, power is rightly held by the one who can hold it. In other words, power belongs to those who have the power to enforce it. So if she can't hold it, she has no right to it. And in that case, there is no treason. It's a great point that he makes. But Jehoiada's coup, this overthrow, to use that kind of terminology, and it feels odd because he was in the right, it feels like a coup is something that's in the wrong. But this overthrow and this bringing back of the rightful position to power was not for power's sake. It was to observe the law of the Lord. In other words, the character of Jehoiada is now proven in what he did with the influence that this plan achieved, as much as the fortitude it required to achieve. Verse 16, Jehoiada made a covenant between him and between all the people and between the king, that they should be the Lord's people. Now, we don't need a lot of context because we've been in this for several weeks, but just realize there's no real break in the narration here. It's not as though a new scene has been introduced to us. Now, there is a new scene because things have changed drastically. But we haven't regrouped and days have passed, and the scene passes on, and the musical score drops, and something else approaches as a new day dawns. No, it almost seems as if we're standing there fresh from the graphic scene of Athaliah's death, and all that went with that. And by the way, Adam's not in here tonight, but I think that was last week, or maybe a week and a half ago, my youngest, Adam, had said, man, that's a pretty violent story. I said, yeah, it is. And she was just talking about killing Athaliah. I said, you should have found out what Athaliah did. She's like, well, yeah, that too. I said, see there. I said, yeah, it was rough. She was not a good lady. But all of this is done really, it's like the fog of the battle has not even cleared. And all of this is done. It's as if Jehoiada says, stop right here. Now that she's dead, she's been taken care of. We will go no further until this be done. There's a covenant to be made. So he makes the covenant that they should be the Lord's people. Verse 17. Then all the people went to the house of Baal and break it down, and break his altars and his images in pieces, and slew Matan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. Also, Jehoiada appointed the offices of the house of the Lord by the hand of the priests, the Levites, whom David had distributed in the house of the Lord. Remember, we talked about the courses. Dad helped me with that last week. Shifts was the word I was looking for, kind of to describe that rotation. But the courses that were distributed, that's connected to that right there. Whom David had distributed in the house of the Lord to offer the burnt offerings of the Lord, as it is written in the law of Moses, with rejoicing and with singing, as it was ordained by David. And he set quarters at the gates of the house of the Lord, that none which was unclean in anything should enter in. And he took the captains of hundreds, and the nobles, and the governors of the people, and all the people of the land, and brought down the king from the house of the Lord. And they came through the high gate into the king's house, and set the king upon the throne of the kingdom. And all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet, after that they had slain Athaliah with the sword. God, Direct us and guide us. Spirit of God, our teacher, be. Show us the things of life in you. Teach us, guide us, prepare us, instruct us in your ways. In Jesus' name, amen. Three things that are renewed. And I call this the renewing of the kingdom, and essentially that's what we come to in the end. But we begin here with the renewing of a covenant. And then we see that he renewed worship. And ultimately, that in all of this, he was renewing the kingdom of Judah. First of all, in renewing the covenant. Now, this is what he did with his success. Now, in verse 23:3, we found out over there was a covenant already made. All the congregation, verse 3 says, made a covenant. Now, this is the congregation that had gathered at that original meeting that we discussed, wherein the centurions, the captains over the hundreds, and the fathers of the nobles, the princes over the house of Israel, over those extended tribes, those men of renown from throughout Judah, and all of those cities of Judah had gathered for this, we would presume, a very secretive meeting, where Joash was presented. He was revealed. This is, when you talk about the reveal, this was the reveal. And all that went into that we wish we could read, it's not told to us, about the discussion that took place. All of that ended with a covenant. And the covenant was this, that one that was of the house of David should rule. Why? Because we love David? No. Not simply because we love David, though we do love David. But it's because it is as the Lord hath said. Verse 3 of the sons of David. So the oath that they take is not a brand new oath. It's not something that simply says, hey guys, we've got a great idea. We think that David was such a good guy that he ought to reign. And I know I'm being a little silly there. It's not at all how it went down. This was simply men who said, God has said David's house should rule. This is the one remaining of David's house. It is obvious that this one should rule. Not because of this one, but because of David, the servant of the Lord. And so they take the oath. It's not a new oath. It's an oath to keep that which has already been declared. What happens here after Athaliah is slain, after everything takes place with the anointing, the crowning of Joash, there is this renewal. And maybe not even a renewal, but a continuation or an expansion of this oath. And what happens is essentially all the congregation of the people, not the secretive meeting that would have had maybe several dozen men, and maybe the people that they told to attend the meeting or told about the meeting, and they by implication of their participation in the plan were saying our allegiance is with David. Now it was time to make it public. There's nothing secretive about this. This is merely a continuation of the oath already taken, which is simply a continuation of the promise of God already made. We're binding ourselves to God's word. Now, we've done this in secret. We've done this under the confidentiality so that we could protect the plan that we had to enact. But now it's time for everyone to essentially do what Joshua had the people do. Who is on the Lord's side? That's the line in the proverbial sand. Who are you going to serve? And in this case, you cannot serve the Lord and be opposed to a son of David being on the throne. You could have problems with David. You could have had a problem with the process. You could have had a problem with many, many things, but you could not have a problem with God's decree. Now, there's a lesson for us in this among many that says this. If you're going to stand on something that's controversial, make sure that really the platform on which you make your point or the basis upon which you built your argument or forwarded your cause is simply that it is the Lord's cause. It is the Lord's dictates. And if you have people to reject you, have them reject you on those things. Now, there will be things about you people don't like. There will be things about you that are off-putting. Some of those you can deal with. You can do something about them. And we ought to. There's a podcast that I regularly listen to, and one of the gentlemen on there said, I regularly practice my articulation because I know I struggle saying words correctly. And he's not talking about whether or not we say the Hebrew names one way or the other. He's talking about simply speaking the English language in a way that is not offensive to others, but that's clear and understandable.
Amen.
That sounds like a trivial thing to me, but here's what he's saying. He's saying, I understand that by not doing that, if I'm taking the lazy way out of that, I'm not doing justice to the work of the Lord in my life. And that can be something that divides people from hearing the truth. It pushes them away. See, it sounds like a silly thing. But whether it's a silly thing or not, if it's a thing that happens, and it is a legitimate thing because speech is important, words are important, the meaning of words are important, so understanding them clearly is important. He said, I'm going to practice articulating well. And by the way, I often hear him mispronounce words. I say often. He mispronounces words. But you know the thing I know when I hear that? He's trying. He's working. This man is far more educated than I am at this point, and may well be for a good long while. It's simply something he struggles with. Now, that doesn't seem like the same kind of issue, but I'm just driving home the point that when we stand on particular things, make sure that the things that you're asking people to divide over, and there are things to divide over. There are things to make a stand and say this far and no further. We talked about that Sunday. There's a point to which this is as far as the law of the Lord, the principles, nature, and attributes as revealed in God's Word will allow me to go. It's simply the precipice. There's no further I can go. Make sure those things are not personality or preference, but they are the revealed Word of the Lord. Now, Jehoida had made his stand on that. Now it's time to ask the people to make their stand on that. So he does this publicly, and he makes this covenant. He continues the covenant they've already taken. But it's not simply a covenant about the king. We read the verse, read it again. He made a covenant between him and between all the people and between the king. This covenant goes beyond the first one. This covenant goes beyond it to the point that now it involves their relationship to the Lord. Now that was inferred by the relationship with the king and their recognition of the rightful place of the house of David. But this time, the recognition is very plain spoken. That we should be the Lord's people. There is nothing else that should define us except being the people of the one true and living God. If you think that wasn't pertinent, I don't know why we wouldn't have that, but just in case you're thinking that wasn't pertinent to them, realize that they have been ruled now for 6 years by a woman who knows nothing of being the people of the Lord. Now, I say knows nothing in that she cares nothing about it. There's nothing about her rule, about her methods, about her personality, the things that she did, that we can observe that she did. It says she observed anything of the Lord's law or the Lord's worship. Nothing of it. And if you go back for the 2 generations previous to this, that she has influenced, the same thing. All the way back until you see Jehoida, who was her own husband. She had influenced him, and the Bible records that she had influenced him to do much evil. So this is the 3rd generation now that she has influenced wickedness in this city and in this kingdom. And the people say, it's time to make a stand. And yet again, this is not a new covenant. This is a continuation of a covenant that predates the secretive meeting with Jehoida and the captains of the hundreds and the fathers and the nobles and the princes. It predates that. As a matter of fact, this predates the promise of the Lord to David that one from his house should rule. This predates that all the way back until you go back into the book of Numbers, to the book of Exodus rather. And in the book of Exodus, the people stand at Mount Sinai and they make a covenant. They make a covenant with the Lord. In Exodus 24, the Bible says, and he said unto Moses, come up unto the Lord, thou and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship ye afar off. And Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but they shall not come nigh, neither shall the people go up with him. And Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord, and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord hath said, we will do. Get the idea that was all in unison. I don't know what it was like to hear hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people say that in unison. I mean, I've been to football games and baseball games, and you hear the crowd cheer. I guess the Georgia game, if you hear, go Dogs, sick 'em, whenever the kickoff was. It's neat, you know. There's all kinds of chants and crowd cheers. The sheer number of it is something to behold. It really is neat. But to imagine hundreds of thousands of people saying together all the words which the Lord had said we will do. A covenant was established right there. A covenant which was almost immediately broken. They didn't stand to the covenant. Thus we have the mediator of the covenant, which was the Lord Jesus Christ. He was always going to be the surety. And by the way, just as a sidebar, as one among the house of Israel, he kept the covenant because Israel could not. He kept this. All the words of the Lord, he kept. They couldn't, so he did. Thereby the covenant is fulfilled. Why? Because God in flesh fulfilled the covenant as a son of Israel. Okay? Just a sidebar right there. But this is the covenant that was already made. That they would be the people of the Lord. Not of Osiris, one of the gods of Egypt, not of Ra, not of any of those, of the pantheon of the Egyptian idols, but that they would be wholly given and committed. Here's the word. That's not the word we find in this text. Sanctify. Sanctify. Given over to one particular thing. Separated to a particular thing. We also would hear the word saints in that. Now, do you remember from our study of Ruth when we talked about chesed? We talked a lot about the word chesed. And it's a very difficult thing for English to get a grasp on because it deals with so much of the attributes of God in the way that he relates. Though it's also done in human terms, it's so descriptive of so much of how God deals with us in relationship. Whenever you find the word saints in the Old Testament, in the English translation, what you're generally seeing is the chesed, not chesed. That's the action, the verb, or the noun, the mercy, the loving kindness, the loving favor. That is chesed. But the chesed is the practices of chesed. That's what a saint is. And that's not just an ideal. It's not just a good principle. That was a rigidly set aside principle for God's people. It's yet another place for us to identify that this was a people wholly given to the Lord. They were to have no other gods in his presence, before him, around him, anywhere associated with worship, was to be no God but one, the one true God. Capital O-N-E, the one true God. So this sanctified, holy, the Kodesh, the completely set apart people is who they were to be. This is simply a renewal of that covenant. They have said that's who we simply are. It can feel at times like a renewal to particular commitments or particular identities. You can even say creed. Some people don't like that word, and that word can be abused and used such that it almost loses its effectiveness. But to affirm statements, doctrinally founded, scripturally rooted statements of who we are as God's people is wonderfully healthy. And I would say necessary. It's necessary to affirm, again, to affirm for our children, to affirm for our neighbors, to affirm for our fellowship. We are God's people. Remember how Boaz interacted with his servants of his field when he approached them and said, "The Lord is with you." And they said, "The Lord greets you." That's how they spoke to one another. It was the identifying mark. We're the Lord's people. So they simply continue a covenant. By the way, rich, gripping, powerful story in Exodus 24 about how this covenant came together. And some good parallels that we'll not get into that really digs in. There's some wonderful parallels to how this covenant is renewed. But it renews a covenant. The original covenant about the kingdom and the really original, the ancient covenant about being God's people. So, having said that, worship now is renewed. Verse 18, or verse 17. then. Now, this then is not, again, this is not a change in scenery. It's a change in backdrop. It's a change in location, but not for long. Immediately, it seems like we would set that word in there. All the people went to the house of Baal and break it down and break his altars and his images in pieces and slew Matan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. Yes, the story is harsh. Also, Jehoiada appointed the officers of the house of the Lord by the hand of the priests, the Levites, whom David had distributed in the house of the Lord, to offer the burnt offerings of the Lord, as it is written in the law of Moses, with rejoicing and with singing, as it was ordained by David. And he set the porters at the gates of the house of the Lord, that none which was unclean in anything should enter in. Immediately upon renewing the covenant, he renews worship. Now, worship had not ceased by any means, but worship needed to be set back in order. There were things about the situation that had simply fallen into disarray. The temple itself was in disrepair. We find that out because one of the things that Jehoiada, by way of Joash, does is to get the temple back into good physical condition. But spiritually, it was in disrepair. This is a cyclical thing throughout the kingdom of Judah. And the history of the chronicles of the kingdom of Judah, you see it restored time and again, time and again. You never see that kind of thing up in the northern kingdom of Israel. For one thing, they had a temple there. All they ever had was false worship. All that was ever propagated by the northern kingdom. But in the southern kingdom, it would fall in disrepair, and there would be revival. It would fall in disrepair, and there would be revival. But notice how it takes place. You're calling further on your memory. But back in our study of Hezekiah, one of the things that we learned about the revival we see scripturally is that it's a little backwards from the way we approach it sometimes. That our idea of revival is that the removal of idols, that the cleaning out of the house of the Lord, whether that be the local body and people of the house of the Lord, or whether that be the personal sanctuary of the Spirit of the Lord, being this house of the Lord, by being a regenerate individual wherein God dwells by His Spirit. Whatever one you're talking about, there's a cleansing and a purification. And that in doing that, we bring ourselves to revival. Now, there's certainly a rightful place for that kind of exhortation. But if you notice the pattern that we see in the Old Testament, in Hezekiah's day, we see it now in Jehoiada's day, and we see it in others, that kind of cleansing follows on the placing of the Lord in His rightful position. In other words, we can clean out idols. We can go throughout Judah. We can even go up into the upper reaches of Israel like Hezekiah had his people do. And we can take out the high places and the altars and the images and the groves. But until God has been set on His place, not as though He needs us to set Him there, but by our recognition and by our ordering of the worship of the Lord, until we have set Him in His rightful place, a lot of reformation won't really bring about revival. Revival begins the same place salvation does. It begins with God. When we set God on the throne, idols come to light. All of a sudden, things we didn't know were idols come to light. Things that we didn't realize had become strongholds in the life. Places of sinfulness and wickedness, or possibly simple apathy. Things that had crowded out the worship of the Lord now come to light. So see that pattern again. Because as soon as the covenant is renewed and the people sign their name as it were on the line, all the words of the Lord we will do, all right. By simple extension of those words, idolatry must be dealt with. It will be dealt with. It will simply happen. You don't have to wonder whether or not it will happen. You simply turn the motor. It's got fuel. It's got fire. It cranks. The engine runs. You put God in His rightful place, and just like the first commandment says, you shall have no other gods before me. If you have God in His rightful place, there will be no other gods.
Amen.
That's a promise in as much as it's a command.
Yeah.
And what do? They go down to the house of Baal, and they break down the images, and they, even before the altars, they slay this high priest of Baal, who probably wielded great influence in the kingdom up to this point. but to kill him right then and there on the spot. What we find is that they did this without delay. They dealt with this comprehensively, and they dealt with it in accordance with the severity of the sin. You say, wow, it does seem like they kind of went, I took this thing seriously. They really dealt with this harshly. With the severity of the sin, as God had said, was such that it had to be dealt with severely. They did not take to themselves an authority they were not given by the Word of God. They did not grind personal axes. They did not wield personal authority or any kind of personal power trips. This was simply following the authority that God had given them in this day and time. We don't have the authority to go around and read actions of violence like this. It's simply not the way God deals with us and through us at this point in God's plan of history. But at this point in time, this was required. But it does tell us that severe sin sometimes requires radical confrontation. And when you find people who have been caught in, or caught up in, maybe I should say that, caught up in severe sin, serious sin, and try to remedy it with small actions, you generally find failure in rectifying it. Generally, they go deeper into it. Why? Because they don't want to deal with a severe sin in a severe fashion. Not talking about things that are unreasonable. But if we go to the Scriptures and the Scriptures commands a particular thing or guides a particular way and sets it out, we should not say, well, you know what, I'll deal with it on my own. I'll just kind of get by with this, or I'll just adjust some things, and in this very serious thing in my life, it'll just sort of go away. No, serious sin has to be confronted seriously, and sometimes radically. But they dealt with it in accordance with the severity of the sin. The one thing that was done right here that I love, not only was the order restored in so much that Baal's house, probably close by the temple, was removed and eradicated, Jehoiada brought something back to the temple that evidently had been missing for quite some time. Verse 18. Jehoiada appointed the offices of the house of the Lord by the hand of the priests of the Levites, whom David had distributed. Now this takes us to Chronicles, where David ordered out and arranged the plans for the administration of the priests in the temple, the courses by which they would minister. Now David is not doing something outside of God's word here, but it does seem though David has been given the opportunity to add, not to add elements to it, but to simply organize it in a way that brought it to the grand scope of the temple. David now distributing according to these courses. But it says it was as it was written in the law of Moses. So he's not gone beyond the law of Moses. This is the thing that's the addition. This is the part that David seems to have added, the last part of verse 18, with rejoicing and with singing as it was ordained by David. Now, if you go back to Numbers 18, we're not going to do this tonight. If you go back to Numbers 18, or 28 rather, you find how the Lord decreed, by the law of Moses, through the hand of Moses, decreed the sacrifices, the burnt offerings. And that's can be heavy reading, beautiful, not just symbolism, but the substance of our Lord's heart is poured out there as it eventually is embodied in the incarnate God, God made flesh, the Lord Jesus Christ, who was the substance of all these shadows. But it can be heavy reading and a little bit difficult. And it's sometimes arduous to separate what stands for what and what belongs where. Well, these people were as occupied with that as we are, and probably tenfold more concerned about what these things meant in their own personal lives. And they were deeply invested in it. And for centuries, that had taken place at Shiloh, well, throughout the wilderness years, and then at Shiloh once they set the tabernacle up. And then in the years of chaos, when it seems like we can't find where the tabernacle went or where the house of God has been moved to, and finally David centralizes it, brings it to Jerusalem. And there in Mount Zion, he brings the tabernacle to the congregation, and he himself can sit before the Lord. And he says, I want to build a temple. And of course, we know the story. God says, I'm going to build you a house, but Solomon's going to build my house. But when he does that, he says, but you can arrange for it, which was not just the supplies. He brings something else to it. He brings some administration. He brings some order. But he doesn't just bring order and administration. He brought joy.
Amen.
He brought joy. 1 Chronicles 23:1. You turn there if you like. When David was old and full of days, he made Solomon his son king over Israel, and he gathered together all the princes of Israel with the priests and the Levites. Now the Levites were numbered from the age of 30 years and upward, and their number by their polls, man by man, was 30 and 8,000, of which 20 and 4,000 were to set forward the work of the house of the Lord, and 6,000 were officers and judges. Okay, so he's ordering the administration, all these things to be undertaken. Moreover, 4,000 were porters. We're going to keep the door. And 4,000 praised the Lord with the instruments which I made, said David, to praise therewith. David brings, of course, he's a musician, right? He's not just any musician. He's a musician that spent his days on the sides of the hills of Bethlehem, engrossed in thoughts of the Lord, in pondering the great shepherd of his soul. And as he brought forth volume after volume after volume, his heart pouring out, inspired by the Lord and empowered by the Lord to not only bring imprecations and laments to the Lord, but overflowing joy. And he took that God had given him throughout his life, and he wed it together with the worship in the temple of the sacrifices. Was there singing prior to this? Perhaps there was. And perhaps what David has said is, there will be singing, not just in the time of burnt offering, but at all points, but particularly now. Other religions had music, beating of drums and chants to drown out the cries of victims during their times of offerings and sacrifices. David said, this is not a time of woe and lament for us. This is a time of rejoicing. This is a time when we should shout to everyone that can hear that salvation is of our God. That's why he would write in Psalm 100, enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise.
Amen.
That's what we're to do in the house of the Lord. David brought this in. And you know what Jehoida does? He says, let's bring that back. We've lost the joy of the Lord in the house of the Lord. So you guys, we got it all ordered. We're going to bring in all of the courses of the priests and Levites, which have actually been honored to this point. So it's not simply that we're going to bring those back in. We're going to continue to order those, but here's what we're going to bring back. We're going to bring back the singers, which means we have to train them. We got to find the people that are trained. We got to find the people that are skilled, and we got to teach others to be skilled as well. Why? Because we will sing our doctrine. We will teach it by the notes of melody. We will shout to the Lord praises that are rooted in his work for us and his coming work for us. David brought joy to the house of the Lord in a way it didn't seem like had been brought there before. What a beautiful picture of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And Jehoida says, man, we've been missing that. Let's bring that back. Let's bring music. Let's bring joy back into the house of the Lord. And so he does. Not only that, of course, he brought purity. We discussed this at length last week. I won't spend any more time with it. But in verse 19, he set the porters at the gates of the house of the Lord, that none which was unclean in anything should enter in. This has been a repeated thing. Jehoida says, we're going to make sure this place is observed. The sanctity, the sanctified place is going to truly be sanctified. So he says, porters, guards at the doors. This was of necessity. In verse 20, he took the captains of hundreds and the nobles, all the people that had been in armies, the governors of the people, and all the people of the land, and brought down the king from the house of the Lord. This is quite a procession. Well, this is as dramatic as treason, really. This ought to be undertaken with great pomp and circumstance. I don't know that there was any music playing right now. I like to think that there were trumpets or shofar, ram's horns being blown right here. But they bring down the king from the house of the Lord, and they come through the high gate. into the king's house, and they set the king upon the throne of the kingdom. Maybe that's simply the recognition. Seems to be what it is. This was the king. Maybe because he's so little, they got to put him up there. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's a great picture. What's the result of this? A renewed rest. That's really what this was supposed to be, was a renewed rest. Because the kingdom of the Lord was always going to be a rest for his people. And all the people of the land rejoiced. Very little needs to be said about this. Very little is said about it. They're glad. We heard their cheers during the execution of the plan as they crown him, give him the testimony, and the people cry out and rejoice, and they said, God save the king. They're rejoicing about this. But it appears that's not simply all that this is talking about. There seems to be new outbursts of praise and of rejoicing. I can only imagine which psalm they were quoting, what they were singing. Blessed be the name. I don't know if it was, come bless the Lord. Bless his holy name. I'll bless the Lord at all times. His praise will continually be in my mouth. I don't know what they were singing. I'm sure it was a song. I'm just sure it was a song because that was the hymn book. And that's what they sang out of. Was the hymn book that David and others had given to them and they had handled. Now they're rejoicing. Their hearts are full of the samach, this gladness of the heart. They're rejoicing. But not only have rejoicing. The Bible says the city was at rest. The city was quiet. The word is shakat. We've encountered this word before in our studies on Wednesday night. And generally, when we think about rest in the Hebrew Old Testament, we think of the word Shabbat, Sabbath. The Sabbath was a ceasing from labor. Good labor, hard labor, toilsome labor, fatiguing labor, or not so fatiguing. Doesn't matter. All labor ceased. It's a Shabbat, a ceasing from rest. Shakat is different. Shakat means to repose, to be at rest, tranquil, undisturbed. While Shabbat gives us the idea of a cessation from labor, Shakat tends to give us the idea of a cessation from strife. A great picture of this comes to us from Exodus 23, I believe it is. Exodus 17, I'm sorry. Moses at the battle of Amalek, against Amalek, whenever he had to hold his hands up, and while he held his hands up, the battle went well as Joshua led the people down there in the valley, but he up on the mountaintop, Aaron and Hur giving his hands eventually some bit of rest, because when they were let down, the battle would go sore, and so they helped him and propped his hands up so the battle would go well. At the end of that battle, you know that Moses must have felt great relief from being able to just let his arms drop. This word shakat gives us a great pictorial definition because its essence simply means to allow someone's hands to drop. It really is the, I'm glad that's over. Can you imagine the relief of Jehoida, of Jerusalem, when Athaliah was dead, Matan was dead, Baal was smashed in pieces, and the people said, I'm glad that's it. Not just a bad season, a bad 6 years, a bad 3 generations. The chapter of Israel that contains the house of Ahab is extinguished.
Yes.
With this right here.
Hallelujah.
The wicked Ahab finally has the last flickering light extinguished with this woman who wreaked havoc, wickedness, and idolatrous influence all through the righteous kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem means Ir Shalom, city of peace. Now, sometimes that's disputed. It depends on who you ask. Like a lot of Hebrew words, evidently. But for a city of peace, there's not much peace in Jerusalem. 23 times attacked, besieged 23 times, attacked 52 times, recaptured 44 times. That's one number. For a city of peace, it doesn't experience a lot of peace. But there are times when you find peace in Jerusalem. This is one of them.
Yeah.
But I think we find a wonderful picture as I close tonight. from the book of Revelation, chapter 19. I think we find a good picture of the rest of God's people as we see it here at the death of Athaliah. Because it says the city was quiet after that they had slain Athaliah with the sword. Revelation 18:21 through 19:5 is all of this, but I simply pull out chapter 19, verses 1 through 3. And after these things I heard a great voice of much people in heaven saying, Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and honor and power unto the Lord our God, for true and righteous are his judgments, for he hath judged the great whore, which did corrupt the earth with her fornication, and hath avenged the blood of his servants at her hand. And again they said, Hallelujah.
Amen. Yes.
Anybody know what that means in Hebrew?
Yeah.
Praise the Lord. You can remember that one, right?
Yeah.
Whatever they said at Athaliah's death, in the coronation of Joash, I know one thing they said. Hallelujah. Praise ye the Lord. The wicked one is gone. The influence is done away. And God has restored again his promise. Father, so many lessons to learn. So many things to be retained, and we sometimes take these descriptively and just pull them up and use them. Father, may we not lose in this the lessons of who you are. That you're a faithful God and determined to keep your promises, not as though it takes your efforts or your energies, but that you simply decreed that your promises will be kept. And even when the time came that it appeared you had let down on your promise, thank you for the faithful priest who clung to your promise, and his wife who acted on your promise, and the people who daringly ventured on your promise. And Lord, with the influence that they won, renewed again the commitment to be your people. May we take these as lessons and as exhortations, but also, Father, may we just simply regard that you are a faithful, promise-keeping, covenant-holding God that cares for your people and will never, ever change your word. It is timeless and immutable. We praise you, we thank you, we say amen, and we say hallelujah. We praise you over in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.